Every day, Muslims in India face oppression and unimaginable cruelty. From mob attacks to discrimination, the news seems to be filled with more tragedies every day. But recently, a video went viral that truly shook the world. It showed a police officer making indecent remarks to a Muslim girl in broad daylight. It was a moment that exposed the harsh reality of the hatred that still exists in India. But what happened after that video was captured, I warn you, the rest of this story will leave you in tears, with your heart heavy. You will not be able to look at India the same way again. If this incident had not been caught on camera, no one would have believed the extent of the cruelty that Muslim women face in India. So if you care about justice, if you care about standing up for the oppressed, then stay with us till the very end of this video. But before we move forward, make sure you've subscribed to our channel, Heartbeats for Allah. A few months ago, a disturbing video was shared widely on social media. The video shows a police officer approaching a Muslim woman walking with her daughter. His comments were lewd and offensive, particularly to the young girl, Miriam, who was only in her 20s. The officer told her, "Your lipstick is very pretty," in an inappropriate and suggestive tone. Miriam and her mother, shocked and offended, immediately began to shout, demanding respect. They didn't expect this kind of behavior from someone who was meant to serve and protect. A crowd quickly gathered, and one of the bystanders began recording the whole incident. The officer, realizing that he was caught in the act, began to apologize profusely. He was embarrassed, but this public humiliation would only make matters worse. Soon the video went viral, spreading across social media like wildfire. People from all over the world were outraged. In a desperate attempt to save his reputation, the officer was suspended from his job, but instead of feeling remorse, he felt enraged. Rampal, the officer, was determined to get back at Miriam and her mother, and he would stop at nothing to make them suffer. Rampal's obsession with exacting revenge on Miriam and her family soon became an all-consuming force in his life. His anger grew to a dangerous intensity as he replayed the incident in his mind, unable to let go of the humiliation he had suffered in front of the public. Every time he thought about the Muslim woman who had dared to stand up to him, his hatred surged. In his twisted mind, the insult of being exposed and reprimanded by a simple act of defiance couldn't be left unpunished. Rampal began stalking Miriam's family, learning their routines, and finding ways to intimidate them. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was a deep, personal vendetta. He wanted to break them mentally and emotionally before physically tearing them apart. Each day, his plans grew darker, fueled by an overwhelming thirst for dominance. He found comfort in his own twisted sense of power, reveling in the fear he was instilling in an innocent woman and her child. Rampal's psyche became distorted as he believed that crushing Miriam and her family would somehow restore his sense of pride and power. With each new act of harassment, he felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, but he wasn't done yet. He was plotting something far worse, something that would make them wish they had never crossed paths with him. One fateful day, when Miriam was out running errands, Rampal showed up with his partner at their home. This time, they didn't come just to intimidate, they came to destroy. Rampal barged into the house and with his colleague began to threaten Miriam's mother with unimaginable violence. He told her, "We will ruin your daughter's life unless you do what we say." He then crossed the line. The officers forced themselves on Miriam's mother, subjecting her to sexual assault while they filmed the entire ordeal. Miriam's mother was left broken and humiliated, but she remained silent, determined not to tell her daughter. She feared that telling Miriam would only make things worse. But one day, Miriam returned home early and caught the officers in the act. What she witnessed that day would change her life forever. Her mother, whom she had always seen as strong, was crying in agony as these men violated her. Miriam couldn't take it anymore. She ran towards the officers, shouting at them, "What are you doing? You think you can do this to us just because we are Muslims? I will take this to the media. I will expose everything." Rampal's cruelty knew no bounds, as he, along with his accomplice, continued to terrorize Miriam and her daughter, Sanya. Their lives, which were once filled with hope and simplicity, had now turned into a living nightmare. Every day became a struggle for them to survive the oppressive weight of fear and humiliation. What started as a petty act of harassment had now evolved into a systematic campaign of cruelty. Rampal, empowered by his uniform and his twisted desire for revenge, was unstoppable in his relentless pursuit of torment. The police officer Rampal and his partner began their attacks with psychological terror. They would visit Miriam's home at all hours of the day and night, under the guise of routine police checks. Yet their sole purpose was to instill terror. With every knock on the door, Miriam's heart would race. She knew what was coming, the same old routine of intimidation. They would accuse her of being involved in illegal activities like terrorism or drug trafficking, all based on nothing more than their own biased assumptions. Rampal's behavior went beyond mere verbal abuse. He would barge into their home, tear apart their personal belongings, and make snide comments about their faith. He would mock Miriam for wearing a hijab, calling it a symbol of oppression, and make crude remarks about her religion, pushing her to the edge of her patience and sanity. Miriam, helpless and alone, had no means to protect herself. As a widow with a young daughter, her only wish was to keep them both safe. She tried to stay silent and bear the humiliation for the sake of her daughter, but the constant stress took a heavy toll on her. But Rampal's torment did not stop there. He would make threats of violence that left Miriam shaking in fear. He spoke of the most degrading acts and made her feel as though there was nowhere to hide. He hinted that if she did not comply with his demands, he would take more drastic steps to silence her. Every day was a terrifying game of cat and mouse, and Miriam began to feel as if her very soul was under attack. The situation escalated one fateful evening when Rampal and his partner decided to take matters into their own hands. Rampal's obsession with Miriam had turned into something much darker. One night when Miriam was alone, he and his accomplice came to her house once again. This time, however, their cruelty knew no limits. They did not just accuse her of being a criminal, they intended to humiliate and degrade her in ways that no human should ever endure. Rampal, with his colleague by his side, forced his way into Miriam's home under the pretense of conducting an investigation. But their real intentions were far more sinister. Miriam, terrified, begged them to leave, but they ignored her pleas. In the midst of their taunts and threats, Rampal's colleague turned the situation into an unspeakable act of violence. The officers took turns abusing Miriam with the promise that this would be the price for keeping silent about their harassment. They made a gruesome video of the crime to blackmail her further, ensuring that she would be too afraid to speak out. For days, Miriam remained in a state of shock and despair. Her sense of dignity had been shattered, and she was unsure of how to protect her daughter from these vile men, but there was something deep within her, a sense of faith, of hope, that refused to let her give up. Miriam knew she had to find a way to stop this cycle of horror. Her faith in Allah, despite the pain, became her anchor. But then, as the officers continued their abuse, something miraculous occurred. Miriam's prayers, which she had whispered with the tears of a mother and the strength of her faith, did not go unheard. One evening, while the two officers were busy mocking her, Rampal spilled alcohol on his uniform, and the sudden flash of flame caught the liquid. In a split second, his shirt caught fire. The blaze spread quickly, engulfing him in flames. His partner, panicked, tried to put out the fire, but it was too late. The fire had burned Rampal beyond recognition. He collapsed in agony, writhing in pain, his body consumed by the flames. The second officer, who had been complicit in the atrocities, stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The fire did not just consume Rampal's body, it seemed to burn away his cruelty, his hatred, and his vile intentions. The divine justice that Miriam had prayed for had arrived in a way no one could have predicted. Rampal, who had thought he was above the law, was now suffering the consequences of his evil deeds. The second officer, horrified by what he had witnessed, came to his senses. Seeing Rampal's fate was enough to shatter his indifference. He turned to Miriam, begging for forgiveness, tears streaming down his face as he apologized for his involvement. The pain of what he had witnessed was too much for him to bear. He pulled Miriam out of the house, apologizing profusely for what his partner had done. He helped her, and with that, Miriam's nightmare finally ended. Miriam's faith, which had sustained her through those dark days, had been her shield. Allah had answered her prayers in a way that she could never have imagined.